Hello, welcome back to Madrona's Pulse Teachings. I am Iris J, and we are talking about the astrology of the week ahead, and we are talking about June 16th through June 22nd. This is a big week. We start off in it. We are in the energy that is actually just building and also shifting and growing this week. It is a very dynamic week. It's also the week that is taking us into our June solstice happening on June 20th. That happens when the sun moves into the sign of Cancer. And that's a big deal this year because who's hanging out in Cancer is our Jupiter, who just entered into Cancer on June 9th. So what makes this a big week? We come into this week and we are in the square between Jupiter in Cancer, having just entered, and Saturn at the first degree of Aries. And basically we are working with that energy, and then that energy is shifting into Jupiter square Neptune. And then the energy of Jupiter square Neptune is going to fuse with Solstice, and the sun is going to come into Cancer as we enter the end of this week. And then that sun is going to conjunct Jupiter. And on its way to that conjunction, it's going to square Saturn and Neptune. And then we're going to have our Cancer new moon. Now that Cancer new moon is next week. That is on the 25th. But this week's energy really just builds into that Cancer new moon, which is happening next week. Okay, so June is a dynamic month, and let's open this up a little bit. I hope that you are doing well amidst all these cosmic surges and ebbing and flowing of this energy. And, so working with kind of just moving through the week on the 16th, we've had the very exactness of that square, which was on the 15th, between Jupiter and Saturn, but we're still very much in it as we start this week out. We're also in the square that was going on between Mars and Leo and Uranus and Taurus. And this week, we're also going to see Uranus move to the 29th degree of Taurus. It is beginning its final kind of march through before it enters into Gemini. So we start the week out in this very dynamic conversation of two squares. And that square between Jupiter and Saturn, I've made other videos talking about it, but really feeling into it this week. This week, it is about a process. And so there is a process underway for yourself this week. Very much that is the case. We start the week out, the combination of these two squares of Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and Uranus is potentially really showing us how we're initiating a new phase. This is the initiation energy is here in both of them in different ways. The Mars and the Uranus is also, it's wanting to break new ground. That Uranus is literally breaking new ground with us as it moves to the 29th degree. We haven't had that with Uranus yet. And so there's something breaking new ground, and that wants to be radically embodied at the 29th degree. Like this is coming. Now this is the first ending of the Uranus through Taurus, because it's going to go into Gemini and it is going to retrograde back towards that 27th degree of Taurus. So it's the first stage of ending. I appreciate astrology and these retrogrades when we get kind of the process of endings and beginnings, because that is actually how life usually works, because there's so many complicated layers. So we are starting the ending of that, which is kind of coming into how we can most radically embody that Taurus values, those Taurus values of what it means to be rooted in your own self-worth, what it means to be rooted in a way of being present in your consciousness that is sustainable to yourself, the earth, all the different layers of yourself, but especially kind of the way that the psyche is embodied. That is what Taurus really brings us into, in a way that is honoring your radical self. This is not about silencing the self. This is about a new breaking ground in that kind of embodying our values as it supports our joy. because this is Mars at the final degrees of Leo, as it supports our creativity. If we're caught in cycles of kind of acting in ways that are about seeking validation, that's when this square is going to potentially create a little challenging grittiness for us. And we start the week out in the square, but it's wanting to help us recognize how we're moving on new paths. And that energy is working with the Saturn and the Jupiter. And that Jupiter is bringing us into a year of the abundance of wisdom that comes from love, the abundance of wisdom that comes from care, that comes from actually slowing down, directing our energy and our own kind of faith in ourselves towards just performing for the sake of gaining validation, gaining those check boxes, and really just coming into being at home within ourselves. That's what this Jupiter wants. And immediately this week says, and there may be some things to release. And those things to release, they could be coming from that Cancer, the deep ways that we relate to our past, to our emotions, to what self-care even means. And they're most likely coming from those first degrees of Aries, which is our primal self. What does it mean to move forward in life from what our primal self that is coming directly out of source, that is connected to soul. This is not a primal self that's wanting to act out of a fear-driven desire. That's a very different desire than the desire that is coming birthed from soul, spirit, psyche, which is that final stage of Pisces where that Saturn has come from. Yet it's conjunct Neptune. So how we're moving, where we're going, that's not necessarily clear, but we're in a stage where we want to initiate something new. And this is a week for initiating something new. And so that square is opening us to recognizing it. And we may be recognizing what we also are releasing. Then that square between Jupiter and Saturn is going to move into the square between Jupiter and Neptune. Okay, but before that, we just have a few things happening, which is especially that Mars, who I was just talking about in Leo, is going to enter Virgo. Okay, so we're going to come into our kind of season of Mars in Virgo. So this is Mars, after it has that conversation with Uranus, Mars enters Virgo on the 17th, and we move into that Earth energy with Mars. Now, where Mars is really important because it's another layer of understanding that Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Aries, because Mars is always connected to Aries. And so this week we have a rhythm change because Mars comes into Virgo. And when Mars comes into Virgo, it wants to slow down from the Leo energy. And Leo wants to expand around that heart and that creativity and that passion. Mars in Virgo, it wants to understand where it's going. And it wants to be actually even a little bit calculated, but not calculated from a place of fear-driven control. That is Virgo when it's getting itself in trouble. This Mars, it wants to be so at one with mind and body that it just starts knowing what it has to do. It knows when it needs to rest. It knows when it needs to move. It knows when it needs to pause. It knows when it needs to make a plan. It knows it wants to work from this kind of intuitive, embodied, it's earth energy, connection of mind and body. And that Mars is coming in on the 17th. And that Mars is going to be talking with the Jupiter. It's going to be sextiling Jupiter in Cancer. And it's also going to be in an inconjunct with that Saturn and that Neptune. And that is going to last all week. And that inconjunct can, if there's any tension coming up there, kind of, and that really the tension could come, it could come as anxiety. It could come as kind of a little, whether it's a headache or it's in the mind, body kind of discomfort. But if the tension is coming up there with that Mars, it is coming because we need to honor our primal fire and the way that needs to be integrated into the Mars who wants to work with the mind body to move forward in a way that is of service to self and of service to the causes that you are part of right now. Okay, but Mars in Virgo needs to be of service to the self and the causes that are driving you in your work, in your vocation, in your volunteering, in your protesting, however it is showing up. But it has to show up in a way that you're always taking care of yourself and honoring your needs and what you are called to be of service to at this moment in time. Okay. And that Mars is also in that sextile with that Jupiter. And that Mars is going to be in a sextile with that Jupiter as the Sun comes into Cancer as well. And as it conjuncts Jupiter, and then we have our new moon next week. So it is dynamic energy. And then on the 19th, we are going to see that exact square between Jupiter and Neptune. Okay, and so there, that is, it is expansive energy. It's also energy that can take us into other planes. Now remember that it's never just Neptune, it's never just Saturn. Saturn and Neptune are together right now, and they are birthing new realities. And so how those realities that are being birthed want to speak to our heart space, to the wisdom that we have in our heart. That is something that is coming up. Neptune is in play. It can be a little foggy, especially when we have to show up at a certain time and we have to kind of check those boxes, whether it's bills or taxes or those types of practical things. Not really. Neptune's kind of not really, it's not Neptune's plane, right? So this is, especially this week, if you can cultivate some space to kind of just feel, especially as we come into solstice, if you can just feel what is coming up, what is emerging, that is honestly the best way to be with this energy. Yes, that Mars is in Virgo, and it can actually work really well if you're allowing yourself to feel what's coming up. Then Mars can work with that, and it can bring it into, okay, this is what I need to do for today. Or maybe you have a breakthrough and you do kind of get a glimpse of where you think a project that you're working on is heading, and then that Mars can work with you at that. Spoiler alert, our projects are going to change. The directions are going to change. The astrology of the rest of this year, taking us into 2026, suggests that things are going to change, but we're initiating something right now, and we do want to follow that energy, okay? And then the 20th, welcome to, in the Northern Hemisphere, summer. You folks who are in the Southern Hemisphere, welcome to your winter. And then the Sun comes into Cancer and we start our new season. And the solstice chart is very important because it also is a wonderful practice to set intentions for those next few months that we're moving into. And this solstice chart has got the Sun coming into Cancer and it squares Saturn. And that happens on the 22nd. Then it's going to square Neptune on the 24th. That's also when it's going to conjunct Jupiter, and then we're going to come into that Cancer new moon on the 25th. So I will, of course, have a video that's just about that Cancer new moon. But, this is coming into Cancer season. As Jupiter is there is support to really, what does home mean to you? What does a safe, loving, supportive, nurturing home mean for you? It is a lovely time to really spend a little extra energy, whether it is, loving your altar, or maybe adding new things to your altar, maybe cleaning it out and creating a new altar, going for a walk and finding some nature gifts to that speak to you and letting them come into the home. These are lovely practices to do with this solstice energy, especially around nourishing how you're always at home in yourself and really setting intentions for healing there. This Jupiter and Cancer journey is wonderful for healing how we are at home within ourselves. And there is a square to Saturn and Neptune, suggesting that there's also an opportunity for past experiences to literally be let go of, especially if they have taught us not to trust being at home within ourselves. And those are complicated lessons. Trust me, I know. They are complicated lessons, and we are here to embody this body and this psyche and this heart and this soul, and to love ourselves amidst everything. The parts that we've been taught we're not supposed to love, the parts that we've been taught are too messy to show up, the parts that we've been taught are too wild or too sensitive or too fill in the blank, because we've all been taught that there's too much something, and that keeps us, from being at home in the whole self. And this energy that we're moving through, it's like you have a role to play in this next phase of humanity, because you are here and it is major astrology. And so we are allowed to love ourselves for everything, and so really this is a solstice that's wonderful to let go of the stories in which we were taught we weren't supposed to love ourselves for something, and to just invite the intention, hand on heart. I invite the intention of that nourishing love, that I am safe within myself, and really doing a few little gestures in the home to represent that, whatever that looks like for you. And this is a time to potentially slow down a bit, and just feel what we're feeling, and that sun is going to conjunct Jupiter. And that is a lot of energy also. And when there is that energy, just trusting that sometimes maybe we feel really energized. Sometimes also we can go into a bit of a yin place and really need to slow down. And sometimes we can go from one to the other on the actual conjunctions. And that conjunction represents a new cycle is beginning for the sun and Jupiter. And that's happening as Jupiter is about to move through the sign of Cancer. And it's happening at solstice. And then it's happening with our Cancer new moon, right? So there is this energy to come home to ourselves, and maybe we are releasing old patterns, old stories, old realities, letting those go and inviting what is here and leading with love. Jupiter in Cancer is really inviting us to lead with love. Okay, so those are the major stories. There's a lot going on this week, but those are some of the major stories that you can weave yourself with threads with. And I'm going to leave it with that. And I am sending lots of love and solstice blessings. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.